Now, sports scientist Habib Noorbhai says the legacy of apartheid segregation is still prevalent in many sports. Race, class and the historical neglect of black schools are still in existence. He researched the feeder system of the SA school-level cricket to test whether male cricketers have a better opportunity to play for the national team if they attend a private or boys-only school. His research included those that only played in tests, one-day internationals and T20 matches. Habib Noorbhai, senior lecturer and sports scientist at the University of Johannesburg, joins me live now to discuss this further. A very good afternoon to you, Habib. Thank you for your time and for joining us on our program this afternoon. You've conducted this research that pretty much looks at the link between the South African schooling system as well as the sports industry, particularly in this instance, cricket. You are probably trying to look at, the question whether the type of school a child attends has some contributing factor to their success in this cricket industry. Just talk us through with regards to some of those findings that you've really made.
Good afternoon, Mathapelo, and thanks for having me. So I think the study that I originally conducted was usually common sense and logic among many people in the country for the last 2 decades. But we really didn't have the stats to prove that. And I was able to show that hypothesis by compiling the data, in which I had analyzed about 461 cricketers who played for the Proteas from Test, ODIs and T20s. And very easily to understand, if you see 10 Protea cricketers in the room with you, 6 to 7 out of those 10 cricketers on average would go to a boys-only school or to a private school, where the other 3 of those 10 players would either come from a club structure, an academy structure, or a co-ed public school. Now, it's very different for each player because we have to take it by a case-by-case basis. But this is the general consensus that we're getting from the research that I had conducted, is that a lot of the players who are going on to represent South Africa at the highest levels are coming from the traditional boys-only schools for over the last 2 decades or more.
Now, South Africa's history is quite clear-cut, and we all understand, the challenges, the fair challenges that this country has had, particularly when it comes to issues of race and apartheid and so forth. 26 years into democracy, some people might think that, scenario has now changed. In comparison now to the data that you've collected, sourcing out information, how back then, feeder school systems used to work, and in comparison to now how it works, has there been any changes and developments over the past few years, now in 2020?
I know that there's considerable work done by both government and Cricket South Africa to really enhance the opportunities and equities for access for many cricketers, especially those in the communities, quintiles 1 to 3 schools, or even the rural areas. But I think that we can do a lot more to give that opportunity for a lot more of these talented cricketers to be noticed. Because we see from the data, 35 to 40 schools out of the 6,000 high schools in South Africa are serving our national side over the last 2 to 3 decades. And even more concerningly, what I found is that since 1994 till now, there have been 26 South African schools cricket captains. 24 out of those 26 schools cricket captains have come from boys-only schools. And those 24 cricket captains, schools cricket captains, have come from 16 boys-only schools, or 16 of those schools that have feeding schools cricket captains at the boys-only, at the high school level. So that's where the concern is. So it's not to dispute that there isn't any interventions being conducted at the high school level. There is, but I think we need to do a lot more, because the current schools now have the tradition on culture for cricket, for structures, for coaching. They have a long-standing history that spans over a century. So it's very difficult to just flip the coin and say we want to introduce more boys-only schools from the co-ed system to produce more cricketers. We need to get more co-ed public schools that have a similar type of structure, an enhanced coaching level, that similar culture as well, to really enhance the amount of players that can go on to represent South Africa at the highest level possible. So that's a consensus from the study, that there has been work conducted, but we can do a lot more to really reach out to those talented cricketers who are unfortunately falling by the wayside.
I'm quite interested in finding out exactly some of those inhibiting factors which are preventing, development in mostly rural areas, who are those largely impacted and marginalized, by your study as you've conducted. Talk us through what exactly has been some of those major challenges. Of course, we can't, compare different schools and private schooling as well as schools in rural areas, because they still need to start on the ground with issues of facilities and so forth, and all of that, and resources. But what have been the major challenges in preventing this from happening at a much faster rate?
The first factor is coaching. So we have a higher level and expertise of coaches within those boys-only school setups compared to our co-ed public schools. So those schools between 35 and 40 employ very good coaches that are able to then enhance the skills and develop cricketers on a better basis. The other factor, as we know in South Africa, is the socioeconomic and financial disparity that we have. So if a parent had to come to me and ask me, which school should my boy go to if he wants to go and play cricket at the highest level? Well, if he goes to one of those 35 to 40 schools, the chances of him being successful is a little bit higher compared to if he went to a co-ed public school. And what we can see from the findings is that limited cricketers who went on to play for the Proteas did come from the public system. A majority came from either the boys-only schools, whether they were public or private, or even just a private school. So these are the number of factors that have contributed to the study, and other confounding variables has definitely been the structure. It certainly has been the culture embedded within the school. We have certain colonial traditions that have also been imposed within the school culture, such as the war cries that you see. And I think another factor is also safety. We see that a lot of the time we see talented cricketers in the townships or in these community areas, but very seldomly do we have these scouts to go in and also scout these talented cricketers to come out of that system and perhaps put them into the private schooling system. That is being done, but on a limited basis. So those are the kind of factors that have contributed to this. And I think if we can address those factors, and I think do a lot more than what's currently being done, we will hopefully start to see more of a balancing act and try to move towards equitable representation of cricketers in the country. I mean, equality is a very sensitive topic. It's very similar to what I call perfection. No one is perfect, but we're always striving towards perfection. And similarly, we need to strive towards equality in the sporting fraternity.
And I think it's quite interesting that you've really come up with this study, because then it sort of ignites the conversations around issues of race and really coming to terms with reality that, the legacy of apartheid still lives on, and in this instance spreads also into the sporting industry. Let's talk a little bit more about that and the effects which are still felt. Do you think that government and mostly all other important role players within the sporting industry do take account of this, and also do, take the necessary measures in addressing these issues?
I think the government has certainly put an emphasis on it, so as the sporting boards with sporting codes throughout the landscape. And I think that if we can just revisit our transformation model a little bit, so what we're usually seeing is that we're trying to select players of color in different national teams, which I think is fine, because a lot of the time players are being selected based on merit. My consensus from a scientific perspective is that if we can just shuffle that model, where instead of focusing it on a top to bottom approach, we rather focus on it from a bottom to top approach, where we actually seeing players at the grassroots levels. And on a longitudinal basis, we will be able to see these cricketers are flourishing a lot more better through the system than what we're currently doing. And I think the current approach and model now is that we're seeing more players of color coming into the system, so that it inspires more players down the levels to actually participate more. And see that it can be done. But I think we need to focus on a model where it's multifactorial, and that it's more from a bottom to top approach instead from a top to bottom approach. So I think that's where we are right now. And I know that this current study that I have conducted will hopefully provide further impetus for it to be conducted in other sporting codes. We need to know, is it the similar consensus in rugby, hockey, netball, swimming, etc., and all of these other sporting codes? So at the end of the day, we as a country want to put the best team possible out there on a sporting field so that they can play the best for their country. But at the end of the day, we need to ask the question, are we giving enough opportunities and equity of access for players who are talented and who are unfortunately falling by the wayside?
And now, Habib, staying exactly on that, you're mentioning that a change is needed within the transformation model, and perhaps then we've been having these conversations. It's 26 years into democracy and nothing really has changed within this particular sporting field. These conversations are held across several roundtables across the country. However, then how much more longer do, all the marginalized children have to wait for a chance and opportunity? A sense of urgency is then needed. Do you think that government is really acting on that, and perhaps all the other relevant, placeholders with regards to exactly what is being done with addressing the issue quite urgently?
It's challenging for me to comment on that sphere on a governmental level. I know there are measures in place. I know that there are policies in place which integrates the National Development Plan by 2030. But then again, just with any other sector in the country, it comes back to the question, how much of implementation is being administered with these policies that have been drafted on? So I think we need to do, as both scientists and as probably policymakers, we need to do something which is known as an impact assessment. We need to assess the impact in those areas where government has set out these criteria for. We need to do a needs analysis to see what's working well, what's not working well, and what can be improved on. And I think if we have more of a meticulous, objective measure in terms of what's currently being done, then we can see improvement. But if we are not going to be systematic and meticulous in our approach, then it's going to be a very long time until we can see sustainable change. So I think change can be seen. It will take a long time, but it would only be achievable if we start setting those parameters on an objective and a systemic level.
All right, Habib, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon right here on our program. Habib Noorbhai, Senior Lecturer and Sports Scientist at the University of Johannesburg, was just sharing more information on that piece that he wrote, looking at South Africa's national cricket team and some of the feeder schools and all the elements that really help in shaping the sporting code in the country.